like to introduce Sharon again on my channel. We're going to talk about attachment styles. For those of you who watched the previous interview with Sharon on emotional dysregulation, you all know how knowledgeable she is on attachment styles. And I thought this is a really good topic to pick up and expand a little bit more on. Again, like all of these topics, we cannot cover literally everything, but we want to discuss just the basics and get you thinking about it. So Sharon, would you like to start off by introducing yourself?
Yeah, I can do. Hi, I'm Dr. Sharon Allan. I have a PhD in psychology from Roehampton University. I've also recently finished an MA in integrative counselling and psychotherapy, a CBT postgraduate certificate. And I'm also just finishing a doctorate in counselling psychology. So I said on the last video, if you watched it, it is all fancy terms. I mean, my whole goal is to be able to adapt how I deliver therapy for what young people need, rather than expecting them to kind of fit in with me. I currently work at child and adolescent mental health services with the NHS in the UK. So I see lots of young people and families with lots of different difficulties.
And I'm really grateful to Sharon for being here with me, in this beautiful city, Kuching. And we're not doing one, but two videos, because you've got so much knowledge. So, and if you haven't already, I would really urge you to watch the previous video on emotional dysregulation, just top tips on how to get some regulation into your emotions. But today is about different types of attachments. So Sharon, would you like to first start off by telling us about the different types of attachments?
So when we're talking about attachment styles, what we're referring to is when we're born and we're babies, we're very vulnerable. And the way we survive is by attaching to an individual, usually a mother and father, or a other caregiver. And that means that when we cry or when we need our needs to be met, hopefully they respond in an appropriate way. If they do, we develop what we call a secure attachment. If they don't, we develop an insecure or avoidant type of attachment, which means that if, for example, I'm a baby and I cry because I'm hungry and my caregiver comes and screams at me, then I learn that actually if I cry, it's not a good thing, because I get a response that would upset me even more. So I would avoid asking for help or seeking something from another. If, for example, I cry and sometimes my parent comes and responds appropriately, but other times they either ignore me or they shout at me, then I would have a kind of anxious attachment style, because I'd be unclear about what's going on. And sometimes that can happen with two parents, where one is appropriate and one isn't. But basically, attachment styles are around safety and around us being able to survive and carry on. So it's a natural thing. If you look at animals have attachment styles as well.
That's true.
So it's worth kind of bearing in mind. The problem can happen if we don't get the appropriate response from a caregiver. This can really affect our attachment style, but also then this carries on through all our relationships, which is why some people have real difficulty in forming close attachments later on in life. So it's really, really important to kind of reflect. That doesn't mean if you didn't attach securely that you can't find a way forward. It's just the awareness is the first step.
So it's the understanding. And that leads me to the next question, because I think you started answering that. How does it manifest in adult life? Because there's a lot of talk about anxious, avoidant relationships, codependence, insecure attachments, which leads to, almost a spiral effect, isn't it?
And I think the important thing to remember is, and I often say this with people that I'm working with in a therapeutic setting, that actually often we're not even aware of it. This is the really important point. We're creatures of habit, and so often a lot of our decisions are unconscious. And so what can happen without us realizing, we can have the best intentions, and if, for example, we're an adult and we meet someone and it becomes a romantic relationship, we will revert back without realizing to our original form of attachment. So for example, if we had an inconsistent attachment with a parent, so the parent was 1 minute was very, very comforting and the next minute was either ignoring or quite angry, we'll often push for that response from the other. So or we'll seek out people that will automatically give us that response. So that's often why people are in relationships, and if they don't work out, and it might be that the other person was very controlling or things like that, that they continue a pattern. There's a cycle because they're not aware that they're being led unconsciously by the attachment style that they develop from a very young age.
That is so interesting, isn't it? Because people often come and see me and say, well, I'm not sure why I attract the wrong kind of person, and then get into these dysfunctional relationships. So it is sometimes about our subconscious leading us into seeking those relationships to continue that pattern. And also in the relationships, I assume that if we recognize it, we can do something about it, right?
Definitely, that's the key. So the key is kind of awareness and acceptance.
Yes.
This isn't about blame. This isn't about saying to people you're responsible when things happen. It's about saying that we're creatures of habit, and there's a hell of a lot that we do and say without even realizing it.
Exactly.
Because it's in our unconscious, but we're led often by things that have happened to us, because that's our brain's attempt to kind of negotiate the world.
So Sharon, we'll talk about red flags in a minute, because I'm certainly waiting to hear, because I'm sure people are wanting to know, do I have, what is my attachment styles, what are the red flags? But before that, I'd really like, Sharon, for you to talk about the dynamic maturational model of attachment. I have attended a workshop that Sharon conducted here in Kuching at an international conference, and some fantastic information in that workshop, because it's very easy for us to blame our parents for everything that might be going wrong in our lives, but sometimes it's also about seeing it from a different perspective. And Sharon, over to you. I'm not going to say anything.
Okay, so the dynamic maturation model of attachment, it's a bit of a mouthful. So going forward, I'll call it the DMM. It was developed by Crittenden, and it does draw from previous theories of attachment by Ainsworth and Bowlby, but it's very hopeful. That's why I love it. So it's a model that actually, as you were saying, it's important to reflect on your past and how you've attached, but that's not the final, that's not the final answer. That doesn't mean that you can't adapt and change. So in previous models of attachment, a secure attachment is the ideal. And there's a lot of work around, if we're securely attached, it means we form secure relationships later on in life. And that is true often in cases. However, the DMM allows for the fact that sometimes we live in environments where a secure attachment may not keep us safe. And remember, attachment is about staying safe. So for example, if I'm in an environment where there's conflict or there's war or unrest, it wouldn't be helpful for me to be securely attached, because I may not be aware fully of the dangers around me. So sometimes in these sort of environments, a kind of anxious attachment style might be useful. So a parent is teaching a child to be aware of the dangers around them. And also avoidant, it might be good to avoid what's happening around me. And also that we can move between the two. So we have a B attachment style in the DMM. It's like a big circle. There's lots of different parts to it, and it's fluid, which means you can move between the parts. And it doesn't say one's better than the other. It's about what's right for you at that time. But understanding where you are can help you if you're seeking treatment. So for example, a C attachment style from the DMM is someone that's quite emotionally open, maybe too emotionally open sometimes. So they might seem quite dysregulated. They're led by their emotions. And so for someone like that, treating therapy, cognitive behavioural therapy, because it's working on thoughts, might be really useful, because it will teach them how to connect what they're thinking to how they're feeling and how to respond in a more helpful way. However, someone in the A attachment style is more led by their thoughts and is quite logical usually, or is someone, so often people like ourselves would come under the A attachment style, which means that we would not be disconnected from our emotions, but we would be led by our thoughts. So we may put ourselves second to someone else, because you'd have to do that in our line of work.
Yeah.
And so therefore, someone like that, it might be more useful for them to do a type of therapy where they learn to connect more to their emotions and then think about the thoughts that led to that emotion.
Right. So the therapy depends on the attachment style.
Yeah.
And coming back to that point about war zone, does it also apply to conflict within parental relationships?
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, we as human beings put our parents on a pedestal, isn't it? And it's very easy to expect our parents to be godlike figures and them to be perfect. But actually, in real life, our parents are human beings. They have their own stresses. And if they are having conflict in their relationships or having difficulties in their lives with their jobs, in their works, would that impact on their as you said, it is about, they want the child to be more aware because of their own anxiety.
Yeah, and that's quite common.
Yes.
That's quite common that parents often, the majority of parents are doing the best they can with what they've got. And so some people, as you were saying, they may have had previous conflict themselves. They're trying to prepare their child. They have the best of intentions. And so, yes, you can have similar attachment styles from conflict within relationships or difficulties within relationships. I think the key point to take from this is that although when we identify attachment styles, it can be really useful, it's not the end result. Through therapy, through awareness and acceptance, you can change your attachment style.
So it doesn't have to be a lifelong misery. These are habits and they can be changed.
Yeah, all habits can be changed. I think the first step is always awareness. Once you're aware of something, you can't become unaware of it. If that, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. So awareness is really key, and then it's acceptance. So this isn't about right or wrong. This is not about blaming. This is not about saying, if you've got this attachment style, that's your fault. If things don't turn out. It's about awareness and acceptance to be able to adapt the way you are to other situations, because it's probably appropriate in the situation that you grew up in, but it may not be appropriate later on in your life when you're trying to form different types of relationships in different situations.
So it is the adaptability of our attachment style. So just being aware of it, I think that is so powerful, isn't it? So in terms of top tips on identifying red flags.
So I suppose, when we're in a relationship, there is always compromise. There has to be. It's two completely different individuals with completely different takes on life. There's probably similarities, but there's always going to be differences. But if we're continuously ignoring our own thoughts and feelings in a relationship, we're probably an A attachment style. We're maybe giving up too much of ourselves for the other, and that's never useful long term.
No.
Because a relationship is a very complex interaction between two individuals. There's always going to be some minor conflict. There's always going to be some disagreement, but ultimately we're looking for balance. So balance means my needs and thoughts are as important as the others. And if that isn't happening, that can be a bit of a red flag, especially if it's happening continuously. So sometimes, if, for example, my partner's having a really bad time, it might be that my own needs kind of sit back in favour of his. And that's okay, because it should kind of move the other way if I'm having difficulty. But if it's always me giving in, if it's always me disregarding my emotions and thoughts, that's not healthy for me. And that's not actually healthy for the other either, because we're getting into a pattern where we're both not in a realistic relationship.
No, and we are setting the wrong expectations for them, what to expect from us, right? So, okay, so that's any other red flags in terms of, so imbalance in the relationship, as if I'm the only one who's giving. What about if the other person is the only one who's giving?
Similar. If you're in a we all need to be challenged to a point. So if you're in a relationship where you're always the one who decides on everything, you always come first, that's not healthy for you or for the other.
No.
We need to be challenged. We need to understand that sometimes we get things wrong, and that's okay. We learn from it. But if we're in a position where we're always the one who's getting everything right, that will impact our other relationships, because most other people won't tolerate that.
That's correct.
So for example, this could be the sort of person who at home everything feels great because they're getting their own way all the time, for example. Whereas maybe when they go to work or they have friendships, they might find there's a lot of conflict, and a lot of friends kind of will not ignore them, but they'll lose a lot of friendships.
They lose a lot of connections, yes.
Because the other's needs isn't being met, so
yes,
it's really important that there's balance on both sides. So often people go, well, it's great because I rule the roost. What I say goes. Actually, that's not healthy. That's not healthy for you.
Yes.
Or for the other.
That is so interesting, isn't it? So it's not just about the anxious avoidant relationships or the codependent side of things, so there's something about balance in every aspect of the relationship, because even if it works in one, it may impact on other aspects of our lives, be it work or social relationships.
And often some of the red flags are where people say, I don't quite understand it. Every time I form a new friendship, this happens, or every time I have a relationship, this happens. And remember, this isn't about blame. This is about awareness, acceptance, and making a positive change for an environment that's more helpful for you and for the other people around you. And it can be really powerful when someone realizes, oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's looking for patterns in your relationships, isn't it? What's happening? If it's happening again and again, then you might want to think about it. And I think I like your chart of the dynamic maturational model. Of course, it's not easy for every one of us to understand it, but it's a beginning, isn't it? And like for all other videos, we always give the advice that if things are really impacting on your life, then you must seek help from your friends, family, and professionals. This is just to make you aware that these things exist, and there's a lot you can do to take control and empower yourself. It's information that will help you to start thinking about your own attachment style. So Sharon, that leads us neatly into the exercise for the day. What would you suggest people do?
I think it's about reflection. I think the sort of exercise that I would encourage is making a note of your relationship. So sometimes you could do like a spider diagram. You could put yourself in the middle, and you could put circles around for all the other people who are part of your life. You could put a straight line for people that are a consistent relationship, and you can have them closer to you depending on how close they are to you. Similarly, if you've had people where you've had a relationship with and it's broken, if you do a kind of broken line, and you can look at that, and it will give you a good understanding and a good overview of your relationships, because often we don't reflect and we don't look and we don't, I call it putting under the microscope, but the best way to figure out what's happening for you is to put you under the microscope, and visually can be really helpful. So I think if you could do something like that, so remember, you just need a piece of paper, a pen, circle, you're in the middle, and little circles around. The closer they are to you, the closer the relationships are. And then think about, are you still attached to that person, or has the attachment broken? And remember, this isn't about blame. This is about awareness.
Awareness and improvement, right? It's
Yeah.
about self-discovery and improving, which is a lifelong cycle,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. And also it's about looking at that and thinking the relationships that have stayed, what is it? What are the key points of that relationship that make it sustainable? Because I'm a great believer in none of us do everything wrong, although some people say they do. There's always something good in our relationships. There's always something good in us. And actually it's about looking at what works and multiplying it rather than starting again completely.
Absolutely. That's such good advice. Thank you so much, Sharon. It's
That's
just
okay.
a privilege to have you here talk about such wonderful topics with your insights. And like every other video, if you have enjoyed or learned something useful today, please subscribe to my channel. Like it, share it, tell it to all the people you know. Thank you for watching.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.